Good afternoon, Deborah. How are you today?
I'm good. Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's time for our quarterly webinar, and we've talked about a lot of topics over the years that we've been doing this. I feel like a lot of them have talked about stress and different stressors. And so I thought today's topic would be a good one of both giving and receiving feedback. And in both directions can be stressful. I know from me, I'm on the HR side, sometimes giving feedback is tough. You think about the right approach. And then of course, receiving feedback, when you're on the receiving end, even though that's how you grow, it's sometimes difficult to hear. So I
Yeah,
will hand that off to you. And I know it also goes
great.
into our personal life. So
Right,
what do
right.
you
So,
would love to hear your
yeah.
thoughts?
So great topic on multiple levels. And I love the term feedback, or I think about it as information. But, we're humans, so we may hear it as criticism. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to keep using the word information or feedback because I think it can be useful to think about it that way as opposed to being criticized or critical.
Yeah.
And so there's our work realm. So I'm going to start with that. And then there's our personal lives. Because actually, I think last time we talked about separating them out, but we're one person in different roles. So let's talk about a work role. And let's talk about first someone who has to give feedback. Like maybe you're a manager and you have to talk to somebody who deals with the residents and manage them, and that's part of your job. Um, so I always like to start with something positive. So I'm going to use you, Lori. Lori, I love the way you interact with the residents. It gives me the chills when I watch you and I hear what other residents have to say about you. So that is really terrific. Um, there's one area that I think maybe could use some improvement. And we're none of us are perfect, so we're always looking at ways to improve. And so my feedback to you would be, if you could get back to the resident sooner, like maybe within 2 days as opposed to 3 days, that would make such a difference. Um, so I'm starting with something positive. I think that's important. And
Mhm.
then I thought, well, if you can't find something positive to say, two thoughts. One is maybe that person isn't in the right role or maybe it's not a good fit. But the other thing to consider is maybe there's something about the person who's giving feedback that they're not able to see some positive things.
Good point. Yeah.
Um, so that's where you might want to ask a colleague, can you help me? Can you tell me something about this person that you think is positive? I
Right.
like that you show up every day. And if you're sick, you're going to call in and let us know. That is really helpful. Um, so then the other side is how we hear the feedback. And when we're in a role of as an employee and you're somebody kind of a higher level supervisor is giving you information, feedback information, that can be stressful. We can be worried. A lot has to do with what happens in our home life and how our parents talk to us. And if they were very critical, then we can't, that gets internalized.
Right. You
So
could
to,
be more sensitive.
yeah, yeah. So if the person who's receiving the feedback can hear it as feedback, as information, an opportunity for growth, I mean, that's kind of ideal. That's, an ideal way
Absolutely.
to handle it. And then maybe we're nervous, we get nervous. So one thing that the person who's receiving the feedback might do is say, I'd like to take notes. And then you write things down. It gets it out of your head. It makes it concrete. And
Right.
so you might say, Lori, this is what I heard you tell me. This is what I heard you say, that I should be calling the resident um, sooner than I have been. That's great. Thank you. So This isn't easy stuff. Again, depending on how we've grown up and the kinds of experiences we've had in our life. If somebody's has very critical parents, then it's going to be hard to take. It's more like a blow.
Right. I think it's coming into the conversation, assuming that the person who's giving the feedback has a positive intent. I think that probably is also, where if they think, that the intention is not positive, right? Not to help with growth, but to be critical, I think that's different. But if they're coming at it from a constructive perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I think it's important for the person who has to give the feedback to start with something positive, as opposed to blowing up right away and saying, oh, you really, yeah. So that it softens it a little bit. And then hopefully the person who's receiving the feedback can hear it as feedback, as information, as opportunity for growth. Because
do you have any tips? Because I'm almost thinking, the natural reaction might be to get defensive. Any tips for an employee as they're hearing feedback to kind of say to themselves in order to come from a more open place to receive that feedback? Any thoughts on that?
Well, to think about it as feedback, as information. Now, it's not unusual that human response or some human responses might be nervous. You might be nervous. You might be, again, if you've been called out, you're responsible for doing something that didn't kind of work out. Well, then you own it, because again, nobody's perfect and we make mistakes. So to your question, for the person who's receiving the feedback, if you can hear it as information that will help you in your job, and this is coming from your employer or your supervisor, and that's their job to inform and mentor you to do your work.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then the other piece of it is, right, we get feedback at home, and that given and receive feedback at home or in our personal lives, maybe not at home, but in our personal lives. So thoughts on dealing with that, which probably gets even more sensitive in some cases.
Yeah. And then, it's good. Our home life is good practice for being out there in the world too. So I like to use teenagers as an example, because if those of you out there watching have teenagers, that can be a very challenging time of life. And they're trying to separate, become independent, and maybe they're rebellious, maybe, their rooms are a mess. So let's say you have a teenager and you want them to clean up their room. So the first thing I would suggest is, as the parent, knock on the door and say, I want to talk to you. Is this a good time? I think that we should do that with everybody, whether they're our children or not. I think that's just you're honoring that person. So you're honoring the teenager, because they might be engaged in doing homework or talking with a friend. So is this a good time? I want to talk to you. So again, starting out with something positive. You're doing so great in school. And when your friend's mother tells me that you're at their house, you're very polite. And I love hearing that. That feels so good. And I have a request. I'd like you to, and then you fill in the blank, make sure that all the clothes are picked up off your bed, or I don't know if you can give me another example to work with, but whatever the issue is.
Make your bed.
Make your bed. Yeah. So my request is that you make your bed. And then will you accept that? Will you agree? And so let's say the teenager says, okay, sure, which is sort of like, okay, now get out of my room.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm glad you agree with me. And are you willing to do that every day? And so you want to work with, you want to honor your teenager and give them some agency in life, give them an opportunity to be responsible. But again, starting out with something positive. Now that's also going to require the parent to not get to the point where they're so upset that your teenager's room is a mess or the bed's never made. So try not to let it get too, let it go too long. And that's true with anything too, I think.
Yeah, timely.
Yeah. So don't let things build up so that you're so angry and upset that it comes out that way. Because it's gonna come out that way.
Yeah. I think that's on both the personal and the work side, right? Is address things timely, or you use the example of a teenager, but it could be your spouse, your partner,
Yeah. So,
frequent communication's always just better than build up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're responsible for that. So to own it, if you allow it to build up, then it's not fair to the partner that now you're blowing up because you've allowed it to build up.
Mm-hmm.
And that said, when you've had the conversation, to not bring back baggage from 2 years ago. That just doesn't work. So you've got to be tough with yourself and say, okay, I'm not going to bring that up again, but let's talk about what just happened. And again, it's information, feedback.
Any other good tips when you're receiving feedback on the personal side? Anything different than what you shared on the work side, or is it similar in terms of being open to growth and hearing?
Yeah. Well, I think it's similar. And again, I think it can have something to do with how it's being delivered. So the person who is having the conversation about feedback or to be sensitive to how it might be heard. So to be able to deliver it in a way that it can be heard and not blaming and accusatory and upset. So you want to deal with it before you get to that point. So whether it's at work or at home, that's a recommendation. And then if you're receiving it, first of all, the person who's giving it, is this a good time for us to talk? I have something, that's a little uncomfortable for me to talk about, but it's important that we talk about it, starting with something positive. And then the person who's receiving that information, you can take notes, but the important thing is to really focus on what's being said and then just say it back. So I heard that what you would like me to do is call a resident within a couple of days instead of what you think I've been doing 3 days. And even when I said that, there might be a tendency to get defensive. So to kind of watch the defensiveness. Even when somebody comes in to offer feedback or information, take a breath and maybe you give yourself some positive affirmation like I'm okay and I'm going to get some good information here.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, is coming into it with an open mind.
Yes.
Being willing, right? Willing to receive the feedback.
Yeah. And, it's not easy stuff either. Again, depending on how we've been raised and what we, understand about that.
Yeah, and the situation could be tough.
Yeah. So.
Well, I think that's a good segue to remind everybody that you're available for 3 confidential sessions per year. so that they're welcome to reach out to you directly. And as always, we'll make sure your information's listed here in terms of reaching out. But if they're getting into a tough situation, having a conversation, either whether it's their personal life or in their work life, that you're available as a resource to them.
Yeah, sometimes it's just about being able to kind of get things off your chest, to be able to talk about something, to kind of work it through, and then get a few suggestions that may make all the difference. So that can be useful. And also, I know we're always looking for feedback from the employees. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to know about? What do you want us to talk about? Use us.
Exactly. When I post this, I'll leave a place for comment so people can give us their suggestions.
Great. Because I'm open to feedback. It's good information.
What a good way to close. That was perfect. Thank you as always.
Thank you.